Something extraordinary just happened, and most people aren't talking about it. Britain's Prime Minister stood before his nation and said, flatly, clearly, and without hesitation, "We will not fight this war, not privately, not through back channels, publicly." And that single statement may have just changed the entire equation of American foreign policy in the Middle East. Welcome to Daily Update, where you get clear, reliable, and up-to-date coverage of global events. To understand why that statement is so significant, you have to understand what's been quietly building beneath the surface of Western politics for the past several months. Since the conflict with Iran escalated into open military exchanges, Washington has been operating under a specific assumption, the same assumption that has powered American foreign policy for decades. The assumption is this: when America moves, its allies follow. That assumption is now cracking. The United States has long constructed its global military strategy around a coalition model. The burden of conflict is rarely carried by America alone. Europe provides legitimacy. Gulf states provide geography and logistics. Israel provides intelligence and regional air power. And Britain, America's oldest and most trusted strategic partner, provides something that no other ally can: credibility. When Britain stands beside the United States, the world takes notice. But this time, Britain stepped back. And that changes everything. Let's walk through exactly what happened, step by step. Reports emerged that the British Prime Minister had been facing intense and sustained pressure from Washington to align publicly with U.S. military posture toward Iran. This wasn't a casual diplomatic request. According to multiple sources, it was direct, it was repeated, and it was urgent. The message from Washington was simple: stand with us. The British response, delivered in a rare public address, was equally simple: we will not. The Prime Minister framed it in clear terms: this conflict does not serve British national interest. Joining it would expose British cities, British infrastructure, and the British economy to consequences that no government could justify to its people. He cited the risk of inflation, economic disruption, and direct security threats to the UK homeland. And here's what made that statement land differently than a typical diplomatic disagreement. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't buried in a communiqué. It was said out loud in public to the British people, which means it was also said to Washington, to Tehran, and to every government watching closely from Brussels to Beijing. When allies communicate through public declarations rather than private diplomacy, it means the private diplomacy has already failed. Now let's zoom out, because Britain's refusal didn't happen in isolation. Around the same time, reports surfaced that India, a country that has carefully cultivated closer ties with both Washington and Tel Aviv, also declined American requests to take a more adversarial posture toward Iran. Despite existing defense and trade relationships, New Delhi quietly signaled it would not be drawn into open conflict. The economic cost, particularly as the Indian rupee hit record lows and bilateral trade disruptions mounted, was simply too steep. Spain's Prime Minister made headlines for pursuing direct engagement with Beijing, reportedly to shore up trade agreements and economic stability buffers, as European supply chains feel the pressure of disruptions in key maritime corridors. Gulf states, several of which were expected to provide logistical support or at minimum rhetorical cover for a broader coalition, have largely stayed quiet, a silence that speaks volumes in a region where positioning is everything. Each of these decisions was made independently, but together they form a pattern. The pattern is American coalition building is failing. And the reason it's failing comes down to one word: calculation. Here is where we need to think like strategists, not spectators. For decades, the American alliance system operated on a principle of asymmetric protection. Smaller nations accepted American dominance in exchange for security guarantees. The deal was implicit, but real. Align with Washington, and Washington will protect you. Defy Washington, and you face isolation. That system worked as long as Washington could credibly deliver on both sides of that equation. But something has shifted in this strategic calculus. And it's not just about Iran. The conflict has demonstrated in real time that American missile defense systems, including the Patriot and THAAD platforms, have faced significant operational challenges against the kind of sustained, layered missile campaigns that Iran has deployed. When defense systems that were considered generational advantages begin to show limitations under live combat conditions, it changes how governments assess their own risk. Allied governments aren't just watching the outcome of the conflict. They're watching how it's unfolding. And what they're seeing is a conflict that has proven far more costly, far more unpredictable, and far harder to contain than initial American assessments suggested. The Strait of Hormuz situation has been particularly clarifying. Roughly 20% of the world's traded oil passes through that narrow waterway. Disruptions there don't just affect energy prices. They ripple through industrial output, food logistics, manufacturing chains, and financial markets. For European economies already navigating energy vulnerability following years of geopolitical realignment, the prospect of extended Hormuz disruption is not an abstraction. It's an existential economic threat. Put simply, European governments are doing the math, and the math does not support joining a war that threatens to collapse the very supply chains holding their economies together. Now add Donald Trump into this equation, and the dynamics become even more volatile. Trump has responded to Allied refusals with characteristic aggression. Reports indicate he has openly discussed the possibility of restructuring America's commitment to NATO, framing the alliance as a financial and strategic burden that no longer serves American interests if member states refuse to align with U.S. priorities. This is not the first time Trump has threatened NATO, but the context matters. When a U.S. president threatens to step back from NATO during an active military conflict, while simultaneously being refused by major allies, it sends a message that cuts in two directions at once. To Europe, it says, "We may not be there when you need us." To the world, it says, "The American alliance system is under internal stress." And here's the counterintuitive consequence. Threatening allies rarely brings them closer. It accelerates their search for alternatives. That's why you're seeing European leaders quietly re-engage with dialogue tracks that would have seemed unthinkable 2 years ago, including indirect economic conversations with Moscow and direct diplomatic outreach to Beijing. Nations that feel their security umbrella may be collapsing don't freeze. They adapt. They diversify. They look for new anchors. Let's be clear about what's actually at stake here. This is for real people, not just governments. For British citizens, the Prime Minister's refusal is being framed as a protection of national sovereignty and economic stability. But it also places the UK in a delicate position, managing a relationship with Washington that has defined British foreign policy for generations, while signaling to the British public that London will act in its own interest when the costs become too high. For American citizens, this moment represents something that rarely gets examined honestly in domestic political coverage. The United States is attempting to prosecute a complex military and diplomatic campaign, and its closest allies are publicly, visibly stepping away. That has implications for how the conflict evolves, how long it lasts, and ultimately who bears the cost. For global markets, the longer the Strait of Hormuz remains under pressure, the more severe the downstream economic effects become. Energy costs, shipping insurance rates, and commodity prices have all felt the impact. And in economies where inflation was already a political flashpoint, further price pressure could reshape electoral outcomes across Europe and North America within the next 12 to 18 months. For the broader global order, what's unfolding right now may represent a genuine inflection point in how international coalitions operate. If America's closest allies, Britain, India, key Gulf partners, can publicly decline to participate in an American military campaign without facing serious consequences, it establishes a precedent. And precedents once established are very difficult to walk back. Here's the strategic reality, stated plainly. America entered this conflict expecting a coalition. What it encountered was isolation. Not hostile isolation, but the quieter, more dangerous kind. The kind where allies don't oppose you directly. They simply don't show up. Britain's Prime Minister didn't declare war on Washington. He didn't align with Tehran. He did something far more consequential in the long run. He exercised independent judgment in public in defiance of clear American pressure. That tells you something important about where we are in the evolution of the post-Cold War order. The world where America's voice was the only voice that mattered is not ending dramatically. It's receding, gradually, quietly, one refusal at a time. What comes next depends on several variables. Whether Washington recalibrates its diplomatic approach, whether the Hormuz situation stabilizes, whether European economies can weather the disruption long enough to reach a negotiated settlement of some kind, whether Trump's threats toward NATO produce unity or fracture within the alliance. None of these questions have clear answers today. But one thing is already clear. The map of global alliances is being redrawn, not by treaties or declarations, but by individual governments making hard decisions about their own survival. And when Britain says no to America in public, the world takes note. Because if Britain can say no, anyone can. Here's what I want to know from you. Do you think Britain made the right call by publicly refusing to join the conflict? Or does breaking alliance solidarity create a more dangerous long-term precedent? And second, if the traditional American coalition model is fracturing, which nation or bloc do you think is best positioned to fill that strategic vacuum over the next decade? Drop your analysis in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to smash the bell icon so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Take good care of yourselves, and thank you for watching.